The crux of the petitioner's case centers on key questions, including whether the process was followed by the National Assembly and the Senate in the impeachment of the first petitioner, and whether the first petitioner was afforded sufficient time to prepare his defense against the impeachment charges. These issues strike at the heart of constitutional and procedural fairness. The petitioners contend facing such upon to examine any potential lapses in the National Assembly and the statistic reading. This provision underscores the High Court's critical role in ensuring constitutional compliance, even in politically charged matters. The Supreme Court of Kenya in Sonko case supports this position in its holding that impeachment proceedings are inherently political. They do not fall beyond the scope of judicial review. The court stated as follows. It's a fairly long quote. I've given it. In Martin Nyaga Wambora versus Speaker of the Senate, the Court of Appeal also held that judicial intervention in impeachment must be exercised cautiously. While conservatory orders may be issued to protect constitutional rights, they should not encroach upon the legislative process unless clear evidence of constitutional or procedural violations exists. The court underscored that judicial intervention should respect the separation of powers, ensuring that the judiciary does not undermine the functions of elected bodies. South African courts have similarly addressed the scope of judicial intervention in impeachment process, emphasizing the balance between constitutional oversight and respect for the separation of powers. A notable example is Economic Freedom Fighters versus Speaker of the National Assembly and others. This is a 2018 matter which involved impeachment proceedings against former President Jacob Zuma. In this case, the Constitutional Court affirmed that while the judiciary has the authority to ensure that impeachment proceedings comply with constitutional requirements, it must exercise restraint to avoid encroaching on the disciplinary functions of the legislature. The court made it clear that judicial intervention is warranted only when necessary to correct political procedural irregularities or constitutional violations. The ruling highlighted that conservatory orders should be applied with caution to prevent unwarranted intrusion into the legislature's domain. The court had this to say, in quote, "Courts must be careful not to impose themselves in a matter that disrupts the legislative process or undermines the authority of Parliament. Judicial oversight is essential to safeguard constitutional rights and ensure procedural fairness, but it should not extend to directing how the legislature carries out its internal disciplinary proceedings unless there is clear evidence of procedural defects or breaches of the Constitution." This decision underlines the principle that the judiciary's role in impeachment matters is not to take over legislative functions, but to ensure that such processes are conducted in a manner that respects constitutional norms and procedural fairness. It reinforces the idea that while the doctrine of separation of powers is crucial, it does not preclude judicial oversight when fundamental constitutional principles are at risk. It is therefore our finding, based on the above, that the Constitution of Kenya has clearly delineated independent and distinct paths for the three arms of government. Accordingly, this court's intervention in the matter before it is warranted through a very narrow window that allows for oversight in cases where constitutional infractions are alleged in the impeachment process. This position is reinforced by our previous determination that the petitioners have established a prima facie case in the petitions before this court.